Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today for our webinar with Brad from Avadain. We're going to allow just a couple of moments for folks to trickle in. We had over 50 of you in the waiting room already, and we have hundreds that have registered. So we're going to allow just a couple of moments for folks to trickle in before we dig into the presentation. Thank you so much. While we're waiting, feel free to engage with the chat feature. Tell us where you're calling from. What you can tell us what got you interested for joining, but I love seeing where folks are coming in from. I am coming from just south of LA in Irvine. And Brad, you were out west for just a moment earlier this week, but you're back home now, I think.
Yep, and in LA for a day, jam-packed day of meetings and back. And I'm recovering at this point. I just can't do that like I used to. When I was young like you, Eric, I could do it all the time.
Oh, just 2 years ago, I say. No, welcome back. I'm glad you made it home safely. Oakland is in the house. I love to see it. Burlington, Vermont is in the house. Love that. San Marcos from the Bay Area. Welcome, welcome. Let's give just a couple more moments here. Hey, Silver Spring, Maryland. I have family out there. Beautiful area. Welcome. Cincinnati. Love to see it. Northern Illinois. Earlyville, Virginia. Raleigh, North Carolina. Fort Mill, South Carolina. Oh, Bruce, Laguna Beach. See you soon. Fort Lauderdale. Oh my goodness, all over the place. Andalusia, we got Boston. Okay, thank you so much for joining, everybody. We got a bunch more trickling in, but if you're anything like me, you can't resist to get to dig into the material here. Thanks again for joining. As I mentioned, I'm Eric Cox. I'm a member of the Netcapital team. We're here today, and we get to hear from the CEO of Avadain, Brad Larson, and we're going to be able to do a presentation about what he's building with Avadain. And we're also going to be able to get to some of your questions here. So a couple quick housekeeping items. Please do use the Q&A feature built into Zoom. I'm actually looking at it right now. That is the easiest way to make sure that we get to as many of your questions as possible. And we do want to keep this as interactive as possible. I know there's also a chat feature that we're just using to share where we're calling from, but please do use Q&A. It's the easiest way to track you folks. We want to make sure we get to them, as many of them as possible. Also, as always, Brad and Avadain are actively raising capital on the Netcapital platform. I'm adding a link to their offering page into the chat feature right here. Feel free to look at that, review the materials, check out their offering statement, and you too can invest and own a piece of Avadain. That's a really exciting opportunity. With all that being said, I'm super excited to hand over the reins. Brad, we've done this a ton now. We've had a lot of fun together, and I'm super excited to get to do it at least one more time. Brad, why don't you come on in and tell us a little bit about what you're building with Avadain?
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Eric, so much. This is our fourth round, as many of you know, and it's gone exceedingly well. So first, a big thank you to Net Capital and to all of our investors who've invested so far. We have a lot of folks on the waiting list, and we can talk about that at the end and what the implications are. So this is kind of unusual, this webinar today, Eric, because I see from the participant list that we're split like 50-50, let's just call it 50-50, between folks who've already invested and then folks who've never invested in Avadain before. So what I thought, Eric, is that we could begin with a pretty high-level overview of Avadain to talk about what it is, and then we'll have about, say, 40 minutes for questions. Does that work for you?
That sounds fantastic. Thanks for that.
Great. All right. Well, let's get going then. So for those of you who have already invested in Avadain, apologies, some of this will be redundant, but based on the questions that we keep getting on the Net Capital discussion board, it's probably not a bad idea to review what Avadain is, what we're doing, and the change we think we're going to make the world a cleaner, healthier, and better place. Uh, so graphene. Graphene is one of the most, if not the most disruptive material that's ever been discovered. It is the strongest and most conductive material. It's less than 10 atomic layers of six-sided carbon. The material won the 2010 Nobel Prize in Physics as being perhaps the most disruptive additive material that's ever been discovered. Adding a little bit can transform thousands of products. And that tiny amount can infuse greater strength, durability, flexibility, and conductivity to literally thousands of products. And really, all great changes in industrial production and manufacturing have been brought about by new materials. And we think that our graphene, LTDF graphene, is the material that will make a transformation in the current industry that we have today. So why hasn't graphene changed the world already if it's so wonderful? Well, um, first, let me just say that long-term forecasts are bullish, but the problem has been that there isn't a material out there that has the qualities of real graphene. That is, there are more than 400 manufacturers who are making materials that they consider graphene, that they market as graphene, but they're really suboptimal materials, such as graphene oxide, reduced graphene oxide, graphene nanoplatelets, which are really graphite nanoplatelets, and then graphene nanoparticles. So these materials are in some way defective and lack all of the qualities of real graphene. They're either too tiny, too thick, or too defective. They're just laden with defects. And that interrupts the ability of their materials to deliver what graphene does. So we're all often asked, well, what exactly does that mean? So here's the best pictorial representation we could come up with. Here on the right, this is one graphene flake at 100,000 times magnification. So this is about 5 microns, 5 micrometers in lateral size right there. And this little box here represents 500 nanometers. So this is really, really tiny. This picture here is at the 500 nanometer scale. So that picture on the bottom left is just one little part of one graphene flake from Avadain. Here we have from two different leading producers nanoparticles, producer A, producer B. And what you're seeing are millions of their graphene nanoparticles. They have a surface area in these pictures that is 200,000 times smaller than this one graphene flake here. So when we talk about graphene in a minute and what its properties are, just keep this picture in mind. So we believe that our large, thin, defect-free flakes, LTDF graphene, are the only graphene material that have the physical properties that can really impart the combination, the fantastic, the so-called miracle combinations of real graphene, of fantastic strength, exceptional conductivity, and ability to lightweight products. And I think we will show you during this presentation that LTDF graphene is the pinnacle of all graphene materials. So think of graphene as a continuum of materials with graphite and graphene oxide on the lowest end and LTDF graphene on the highest end. And we believe that's the part of the market that will experience the most rapid growth and have the highest margins. And we also are confident about the fact that we have globally patented this technology, which we will also discuss in a minute. So 3 properties unlock the superpowers of graphene. We keep referring to LTDF graphene, so that stands for large, meaning 25 square microns or greater. Thin, meaning 5 or fewer atomic layers. So that's much thinner than a hair. It's much thinner than a sheet of paper. It's really getting down to the absolute minimum of two-dimensional materials at the atomic level. And it's essentially defect-free. Nothing can ever be 100% defect-free, but this is virtually 100% defect-free. So if you look at this picture of another graphene flake, you can see that it's thin, you can see right through it, it's transparent, and you don't see any defects in that flake. So, okay, so we have this what do you do with it? Well, you add it in the tiniest amounts possible, something between 0.01% and 0.5% can make a fantastic difference in many thousands of products in many, many different industries. We add graphene, LTDF graphene to things like coatings and paints, to composites, conductive inks, fibers, polymers, and any kind of a substrate virtually. And these are then added into the manufacturing processes that currently exist. Our goal is to have a drop-in additive material so that we can supercharge things like advanced manufacturing, aviation, to space, defense and space, energy security and resilience, particularly in the area of energy storage, and just generally revitalizing the American economy. When I'm in Washington talking about what problems face the Congress, one of the things that I hear about all the time is that all the pieces appear to be in place to get American manufacturing going again, except it isn't happening fast enough. So what I am arguing is that we need a new material, as we did in past industrial revolutions, in order to get this new industrial revolution going today. So some of the immediate markets that we see are clearly in the defense industrial base. We hear about critical minerals being a threat to the American economy. We hear about it being a threat to the defense sector. Um, all of that is true, but LTDF graphene, because it operates with a different set of physics, can actually, in some cases, replace, other cases reduce, and then finally amplify existing critical materials that we are worried about because of the vulnerable supply chain. So looking at that, we can see very strong demand for LTDF graphene coming just directly out of the defense industrial base. In unmanned aerial systems or drones, there's an even bigger need for LTDF graphene in the short term. We are in discussions with various groups within the Department of Defense and in the private sector to use Avadain's LTDF graphene in a variety of different ways, one of which is to integrate it into the composite material that makes up the drone's body in order to strengthen it, provide EMI shielding, and to reduce the weight by up to 30% so the drone can go further with the existing charge that it has from its battery. But just because we're mentioning these doesn't mean there aren't really many, many other high value uses. For example, antennas, aircraft repair. We're working in both areas. Ballistic protection, lubricants. Graphene can be an amazing additive material to make high performance lubricants even better. In the area of supercapacitors, to almost double the performance of the supercapacitor using the LTDF graphene as a conductive material, and stealth. One of the really cool things about LTDF graphene, which has gone largely unnoticed, is that by its nature, it converts radio waves or radar signals into thermal energy. So instead of coming up with different angles to put onto a plane or a ship, and then covering it with non-reflective material, just coat it with LTDF graphene. It will then absorb that radio signal and it converts it just by its nature into thermal energy. So we were talking just a minute ago about critical minerals. Here's a brief presentation. I don't propose to go into this. We do have this on the Netcapital offering page, and you can download a whole presentation right from there on this. But this is just to give you an example of some of the critical minerals that LTDF graphene can reduce or lessen foreign demand for: silver, copper, cobalt. Scandium is a really interesting one because scandium is necessary to make aluminum into aerospace grade aluminum. And the scandium acts as a reinforcement to stiffen, to harden the LTDF graphene. Well, it turns out that you can't get away from having a little bit of scandium, but you can have a little bit of graphene added to it, and it has about a 10x amplification effect on the scandium. So one way to reduce reliance upon Chinese sources for scandium is to use LTDF graphene, which we can source here in the United States and manufacture here in the United States, to make that little bit of scandium work harder and go further. So what do we see as the market opportunity? Well, first, obviously, Avadain is not, because we have an active Reg CF regulation going on, and I don't want Eric to have a heart attack. So we're not going to refer to our figures. We're going to refer to other people's figures. I mean, and it's no secret that George Gilder published his work on graphene a couple of years ago. He projected that graphene can have an $11.5 trillion global macroeconomic impact. That is the multiplier effect of graphene because of its transformative nature. The Graphene Council has said that graphene can revolutionize, can truly transform 45 plus industries. And you can go and find that on their website. We have talked about before in various presentations and in our filings of having a $200 million serviceable market by the year 2030. And we believe that 100% of what we're doing has an application to high degree, high performance market applications that no other graphene material can address. We're often asked, what is the status of your technology? Are you really early stage? Well, yes and no. Okay. We started working on this in 2016, and the process itself was developed by the Fraunhofer Institute for Applied Solid State Physics in Germany. We funded it. And they proved that it could work in 2019. They published a seminal peer-reviewed paper in a respected journal, RSC Advances, in 2019. We then brought that over, formed Avadain, and then retained Southwest Research Institute in 2022 to begin upscaling that manufacturing process from the lab into commercial scale. SWRI was able to do that and has increased the production capacity 2,000 times since then. And we now have a full-scale reactor working and making samples. We are currently raising capital to build the first modular pilot plant for our first manufacturing licensee, Harcross Chemicals. And the pilot plant is a springboard for commercial plant deployment, which is engineered and going to be built in the future by NORAM Engineering. So these are the technology validation points we've hit. I won't go on to that too much, except to say that we have 60 patents that have been granted across 39 countries. We have many, many, many more patents pending, and we'll be filing even more patents in the near future. We've been able to use Fish and Richardson, which is the US's #1 IP law firm, since 2016 to build that moat and protect it. Our model, our economic model, the business model we have is licensing. And this has, I think, enabled us to attract investment and to also keep competition at bay. And the reason is that we seek to take the companies who would naturally want to compete with us and make them our partners by licensing the manufacturing of technology to them. So what am I talking about? We're talking about going to chemical companies, advanced materials manufacturers, and end users with a mission critical need for graphene. So their need is to have the graphene and then sell it to others to make money. And our desire is to shift the capital burden to them so that we don't have to build billion-dollar plants all over the United States or all over the world. We take a 10% royalty, and then it's their responsibility to build the plants. And we believe that that de-risks Avadain. so that we can operate with a relatively small amount of capital. So far, we've raised, because the fundraising is still ongoing, it's hard to say, but call it $20 million of equity plus so far. We have a little bit more to go in this particular round. So from our point of view, we've used very little capital. We have a model where we convert our would-be competitors into our partners, and then that allows us to rapidly scale the production capacity for LTDF graphene because these partners of ours have it in their self-interest to manufacture it and sell it as quickly as they can to catch up to the demand that exists. We think we've had a lot of traction. We've in total, including non-dilutive grants, we've raised more than $23 million so far. The cash on hand before we started this crowdfunding round is $4.5 million. Tack onto that another four or five, and or another four, say, and we're probably at about 8.5 currently. Obviously, we have more than 18 months runway. 18 months is the minimum that I want to maintain in order to keep the company viable. We have a very clean cap table, 67 existing investors. Netcapital is one of those existing investors, and Netcapital has more than 3,500 of you who are part of that one line item on our cap table. And we have our first license agreement that was signed a little more than a year ago with Harcross Chemicals. So how do you make money? How do we all make money out of this? Each production line is modeled to produce $200 million in gross sales revenue. Our royalty is 10%. By 2030, we hope to have at least 10 production lines in operation, each generating the 200 million, which means that Avadain will have a $200 million plus annual recurring revenue under those set of assumptions. So we see that as the inflection point for hockey stick growth because we've really de-risked the business at that point. And from 10 licenses, 10 production lines rather, we see demand for, 1,000 or 2,000 or more production lines. So that's why we believe at the current time that we would be an excellent acquisition target for a company that comes along and has an unlimited balance sheet and says, we think we can grow this graphene manufacturing and take it global and make it the out of the park opportunity that people think it is. So let me pause there. I know I've gone through this very quickly, but there are a lot of questions, and let me turn it back to Eric.
Thank you so much, Brad. I love hearing it every time. You update it every time. It's amazing the progress you continue to develop. And we do have some great questions coming in already from over 100 of you on the line right now. So thank you so much for joining and thank you so much for participating. Let's start with these ones kind of combine really well. Somebody mentioned, I love the idea of LTDF graphene extending and amplifying the properties of rare earth minerals. Is there going to be sufficient production and cost to make that reasonable? If so, and when? And I think it's talking about sufficient production and reduction in cost there. And that really ties really well into, can Avadain's graphene potentially be a replacement, a whole replacement for rare earth minerals? Maybe we can combine those.
Great. Okay, so let's right away, and I hate to be a geek about this, but I get into conversations with people in the field all the time. So we have critical minerals, and a subset of that are rare earths. Okay, let's talk about rare earths first. Rare earths are very expensive and for the most part dominated by, well, almost entirely dominated by foreign suppliers. And of those foreign suppliers, mostly China. So a relatively large amount of a rare earth would go into making something like a magnet. And so you're stuck. Magnets run everything. Magnets run missiles, submarines, aircraft, everything. You just name it. So if we lost access to rare earths, we wouldn't be able to make the magnets that really drive really critical things for our economy. So that's the basis point. Now, what can we do? Well, Avadain doesn't really need to compete with that, what we can do is solve the problem with other chemistries so that we don't have to use rare earths. So, for example, there's something called an iron nitride permanent magnet. It's rare earths free, but it has three problems that it can't really solve in order to gain manufacturability. So, according to AI and according to some of the work that we've been doing theoretically, Avadain's LTDF added to the iron nitride rare earth free permanent magnets can create magnets that are equal to or superior in strength to rare earth magnets. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at of the thousands of opportunities. So with respect to rare earths, that's great. Now, somebody asked in one of those questions, a subset of one of those questions was cost. Iron and nitride are pretty low cost materials, but they can't really make the magnet work the way it needs to. We need, again, we haven't done the work yet. The question was asked, so it's not something I put in my presentation because it's a bit premature, but I'm happy to answer. We estimate that adding like 0.001% of our graphene can straighten out the problems that the iron nitride batteries have. And we are talking or trying to talk to somebody about testing that in reality. So the cost is negligible for including LTDF graphene in a rare earth free iron nitride magnet. And so that's just one. In terms of the critical minerals, broadly speaking, you know, aircraft need scandium in the aluminum in order to make aviation grade aluminum. Period. There's no substitute. So if you can't get the scandium, your choices are don't make aircraft or missiles or spacecraft or any of those things, or find a solution. And LTDF graphene, I think, has already been proven by other researchers to be able to do it. We are working with and have worked with the Navy in one particular testing application, and we're anxious to do more. But I think that's cost insensitive because you either do with it or you do without it. It's not a question of cost at that point of view. So let's get on to other questions, Eric, because I could go on this for 20 more minutes.
It's funny. I've had the pleasure of sitting in on some of these and hosting some of these with you, and I learned something new every single time. So I appreciated a little bit of the distinction between rare earth and critical minerals, and I think you did a great job of making
Well,
it so that
thank you.
even somebody like me can understand. So
Yeah,
thanks a bunch there. Somebody, great question came in here, and I'm going to come back to the IP questions. I haven't forgotten about you. Somebody asked though, and this is a good one: will the pilot plant generate revenue? Or when do you expect to be able to generate revenue? And when will you start getting to potential profitability? So I always like to add one quick distinction. Everything about the future is inherently speculative and uncertain, but we're going to talk about what we imagine and what we hope to accomplish. So, Brad, can we talk a little bit about revenue generation and potential profitability?
sure. So let me try to talk about what the pilot plant is and isn't, because it's really an important milestone. It's our next milestone, and it's clear in everybody's mind right now. So the pilot plant has one purpose, and that is to demonstrate to Harcross Chemicals and other chemical manufacturers and other potential licensees that we can have an automated process that uses our full-scale reactor, and you put the graphite in at one end and you take the graphene out at the other end. I mean, and it is a little bit more complicated than that, I promise you, but that's the general idea, right? And so this is going to make 50 kilograms a year. So that means samples, okay? There's no point in selling that, and that is not our intention. Our intention is to use it to give away as samples to different manufacturers to use in their end product applications testing so that they can place orders for tons of graphene from Harcross and other licensees. So if we happen to generate revenue that way, I will surely come with a bottle of champagne. Eric will have one bottle of champagne and we will toast that we did it. But that isn't the intent. The intent is to show that it works. We then are going to be taking orders, or NORAM will take orders to build these full-scale production plants. And they will then generate the revenue that we want. So we want to go as quickly as possible into the pilot plant, vet it, demonstrate it, take orders for full-scale production plants, and get tons of graphene into production.
Well, so well put. I'm actually already chilling my champagne because I have the foresight to get ahead of it. I think there's a couple of good questions that came in about your relationship with the Department of Defense. I know we talked a lot about defense spending, and that's super critical. I think we also want to talk about how there's a big humanitarian application that also goes side by side with the Department of Defense. I wanted to kind of allude to that. But on this specific question, what about the Defense Department and grants or talks? How are that going? Is there anything that you can share? And I know that's quite sensitive, so just kind of broad strokes as you can, or any details that you can share.
Sure. I think there is growing recognition of the importance of LTDF graphene. Um, y- you know, it is a new material, and it is very difficult for conservative people who, for lack of a better word, are bureaucrats, to get their mind about around disruptive things, right? You know, if we need to make uh, the Bradley fighting vehicle more ballistically stronger, that it can withstand greater attack. Well, we'll just put more iron and steel around it, right? And so what if it weighs another 100 tons? Then we'll buy a bigger engine, and then we'll get a bigger transmission, and we'll do all of that. So we'll understand that linear thinking. And, there is a logic to it. And so when we go in and say, hey, wait, just a second, why don't we reduce the weight and add graphene, in certain ways to it in order to increase the strength, because it is 200 times stronger than steel, right? Why would you need to add weight when you can add strength, right? Well, it is really hard to do that, but we are making progress. We are in talks with different branches of the military. We're talking to the Department of Energy, the Department of Commerce. You know, and to their credit, they do listen. They do have meetings with us, which is great. We're not getting turned down anymore, or not as much as we used to. We used to have 100% turn down rate. Now we're probably above 50% in having meetings. So that's all going in the right direction. So I'm thinking that I'm hoping we will get a drone contract in the not too distant future. The Pentagon is going to be building hundreds of thousands of class two one-way drones that have to meet certain specifications. And LTDF graphene absolutely, in my opinion, absolutely can help them meet those very demanding specifications. And they're going to have a tough time meeting them without a new material. And I think we're ideally focused on that. But we're also working on other things like antennas, um, EMI shielding, energy storage, all of those things.
Fantastic. No, thank you so much for that, Brad. And I love the DOE conversations as well. A couple of really cool questions that came in. I'm trying to keep it in order here, but somebody asked if the Netcapital Group is one of 60 or so investors that have participated, can you give an idea of what some of the other investors look like, types or that kind of groups, or anything that you can share about the other investors that have decided to back Avadain?
Sure. Well, Panasonic is the biggest investor, and they've been on board since 2017. Um, we have Harcross Chemicals is a very large investor. As our first licensee, they wanted to take an equity position in Avadain. They're on our board of directors, and they wanted to demonstrate tangibly their support. We have a group out of Oxford, Mississippi, that has invested in Avadain, and then it's a lot of folks like you who've simply invested a lot of money, a lot more money. So that's really what it looks like.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'm going to use this moment. Actually, we're a little over halfway through our conversation. Time flies when you're having fun. So I'm going to go ahead and go straight to our shameless plug. As a reminder, we're on the line with Brad here because they're actively raising capital on Netcapital, and you too can own a piece of Avadain. So you can go to netcapital.com/companies/Avadain, or you can go to netcapital.com and search Avadain, or you can go directly to the link that I added into the chat there where you can learn more, review the offering page and offering statement. You too can invest. Okay, let's get back to our programming here. So many great questions, folks. I really appreciate it. I promise I'm going to get to as many of these as possible. When somebody asked if it's possible, and this is just maybe we could talk about this offline, Brad, but maybe it would be great to hear from someone from Harcross in one of these other webinars. So we could
Sure.
talk about that. That could be a really fun
Absolutely.
one.
Yeah.
I think that's
Love
a
it.
great idea. And
I do
then
too.
yeah. And then somebody asked, what is NORAM's capacity to build full scale plants? It's like a year, two every 6 months. What does the timeline for like a plant building look like
Right.
potentially?
So we let me step back for a second. Our process is electrochemical. It's the electrochemical exfoliation and expansion of layers of graphite, single atomic layers of graphite. And what makes our process work, at a very high level, I don't want to give heartburn to any of our scientists, okay, is that we take that graphite and we separate the atomic layers through a process of injecting hydrogen ions which form between those layers. So we use we use hydrogen to separate gently those layers. We maintain the large size of the flakes, and that helps us to distinguish ourselves from other processes. We then heat briefly the flakes that have been created. The hydrogen goes off into the atmosphere. We capture it so it doesn't actually go into the atmosphere. It's released from the carbon, and then we have the pure defect-free flakes. Um, so we had to find a company to manufacture it that understood the electrochemistry of it. And we found NORAM because their business is building billion-dollar electrochemical plants all around the world for big chemical companies. So they have a lot of capacity. Our pilot plant will be on a 20-foot skid. So if you thought of a 20-foot container that a truck might pull,